I never imagined a peaceful morning walk by the lake would turn into a declaration of war. But that's exactly what happened the day I found orange hazard tape wrapped around the trees and a bulldozer idling beside the water, our HOA claimed. They were protecting us from a flood risk. But what they really did was destroy a thriving ecosystem, tank property values, and rob the entire neighborhood of the one thing that made it feel like paradise. And here's the kicker: they did it without telling any of us. No warning, no vote, just a secret meeting and a drained lake. That's when I decided, if they wanted to play dirty, I'd play smarter. What they didn't know was, I had a plan. And by the time I was done, their $5 million mansions would be worth less than the soggy ground they were sinking into. Let me rewind a bit. I live in a gated community nestled on the edge of a quiet town. The kind of place that looks like it came straight out of a luxury home magazine. Trimmed lawns, white fences, Teslas and Land Rovers in the driveways. The crown jewel of our neighborhood? A stunning man-made lake. Crystal clear, home to ducks, geese, and a couple of brave swans. It wasn't just scenery, it was the soul of the place. People kayaked, kids fished, and summer evenings were golden. I bought my home here 5 years ago. It wasn't cheap, but waking up to that view every morning? Worth every penny. The lake brought a sense of peace, and my back porch felt like a private resort. Of course, every paradise has a gatekeeper. In our case, it was the HOA, a board of retired CEOs, lawyers, and a few too many people with too much time. They were strict, no doubt, but I never expected them to do what they did. One Monday, I noticed something strange. Survey flags dotted the edge of the lake, and a few unfamiliar trucks were parked nearby. The next day, heavy machinery arrived. Then came the notices, not mailed to us, but taped to street lamps and mostly blown away by the wind. The HOA had decided to drain the lake. Their reason? Potential flood risk, due to uninspected infrastructure beneath the lakebed. According to them, if the old drainage pipe failed during a storm, nearby properties could be flooded. But no one could point to actual damage or documentation. It was all just theoretical. I called the HOA president. Voicemail. I emailed. Nothing. So I attended the next HOA meeting, only to be told the vote had already happened. Quietly, among board members only. No community input, no consultation with environmental experts, just a closed-door decision. That same week, the pumps were activated. I watched, horrified, as water levels dropped. Fish flopped helplessly on drying mud. Birds circled, confused. Within a week, what had been a lake became a sunken pit of cracked earth and rotting debris. Neighbors were angry, but the HOA doubled down. This is for everyone's safety, they said in their monthly newsletter, printed on expensive cardstock. A necessary sacrifice. But it wasn't necessary. It was lazy governance at best, and a power trip at worst. They thought we'd just accept it. They were wrong. Once the lake was gone, everything changed. The first thing I noticed was the smell. Without fresh water cycling through, the bottom of the lakebed became a breeding ground for algae and decay. By the second week, the entire neighborhood smelled like mildew and stagnant swamp water. Next came the mosquitoes. Swarms of them. With no fish to keep populations in check, they multiplied overnight. Families stopped hosting barbecues. Windows stayed shut. One neighbor joked it felt like we were living in Florida during a flood. Without the flood, property values plummeted. Real estate listings that had boasted lakefront views now featured disclaimers. Former water feature. Present. The market reacted fast. 3 homes went up for sale, and none of them found buyers. Wildlife vanished. The birds left. The frogs, gone. Even the turtles that had nested on the banks disappeared. But beyond the environmental cost, something else was lost. Community spirit. That lake had brought us together. It gave us a reason to wave hello, to meet by the dock, to feel like we were part of something special. Now, all that was left was bitterness. I spoke with neighbors, and most of them had been just as blindsided as I was. A few had supported the HOA's decision, mostly those who lived uphill. But for the rest of us, we were left wondering how a group of volunteers managed to strip away everything we loved about our homes in less than a month. I felt angry, helpless, until I realized there might be a way to fight back. One evening, I sat scrolling through old photos of the lake on my phone when something caught my eye, a document I'd saved months earlier from an HOA newsletter. It mentioned liability, insurance, and how our HOA was exempt from damages caused by natural events, unless negligence could be proven. That word stuck with me. Negligence, that I started digging. I spent hours reading environmental regulations, city ordinances, even the HOA bylaws. And what I discovered shocked me. The HOA had skipped several required environmental reviews before draining the lake. Not only that, they had ignored a 10-year maintenance report that listed the lake's condition as stable. The whole flood risk excuse? Fabricated. I called a friend who works in environmental consulting. He confirmed that draining the lake without proper permitting could be considered a violation under state wetland protection laws, especially if the drainage affected surrounding terrain, which it clearly had to. That's when the idea hit me. If they could ruin my peace with murky water and bad decisions, maybe it was time to return the favor. With mud, I wasn't going to go rogue. No sabotage, no illegal stuff. I'd seen too many revenge stories go sideways. My plan needed to be smart, legal, and most of all, undeniably public. Step 1. I filed an anonymous complaint with the state environmental department. I included photos, documents, and drone footage of the drained lake and the expanding wetland forming behind the HOA president's backyard. Step 2. I connected with a local journalist who covered environmental issues. She was intrigued. Within a week, a story appeared online. Luxury HOA accused of environmental violations after draining protected water feature. It gained traction fast. Step 3. I partnered with a nonprofit that focuses on wetland restoration. Turns out once a lake is drained and natural runoff starts spreading, it can be reclassified as a natural wetland. The area now qualified for review and restrictions on development, especially uphill. And guess what sat uphill? Yep. The $5 million mansions. By initiating the wetland review process, I effectively froze all permits, renovations, and even landscaping projects for dozens of homes. Suddenly, the HOA wasn't just unpopular, they were under investigation. Neighbors started talking. News crews came. HOA board members started resigning. The president? He went silent, but I wasn't done yet. I submitted a petition to the city to classify the former lake area as a protected environmental zone. If approved, it would block the HOA from refilling the lake, or worse, turning it into a parking lot or garden. The plan had worked. Their empire of concrete was turning to swamp. The morning the city posted a public notice on the HOA bulletin board, I knew the tide had turned. Big, bold letters. Proposed wetland review. Public comment open. A fancy way of saying, you can't touch this land for at least 6 months. People were furious, but not at me. At the HOA, the once pristine lawns of the luxury homes now sat adjacent to muddy runoff from where the lake had once been. Heavy spring rains made things worse. Without proper drainage, water pooled near the foundations of several homes. I snapped photos of sandbags lined up outside a $4.8 million house. Irony. Meet karma. The media dubbed it the Swamp War. Reporters showed drone shots of the soggy lake bed, now slowly turning into a marsh. The nonprofit pushed for conservation funding. Even the mayor weighed in, suggesting the HOA should be more transparent moving forward. Residents who had once ignored HOA politics were now holding emergency meetings in garages. They demanded answers. They wanted resignations. Meanwhile, I stayed anonymous, watching from the sidelines as my plan unfolded. The HOA tried to counter. They sent out expensive legal memos full of scare tactics, but it was too late. Between the environmental probe, the media pressure, and the pending wetland designation, they were stuck. Some neighbors even thanked me in whispers. One guy, a retired judge, slipped me a note that said, "They underestimated you." Good. As the former lake bed grew greener with wild grass and reeds, some people even began to see the beauty in it. Kids played in the mud. Birds started returning. And the best part? The HOA couldn't do a thing about it. 6 months later, the city officially recognized the area as a protected wetland. That sealed the deal. The HOA couldn't refill the lake, couldn't build on it, and couldn't even mow it without permission. A new HOA board was elected. 3 of the original members were voted out, including the president. At the final meeting before he stepped down, he tried to blame misinformation and hysteria. But no one was buying it. Property values slowly stabilized. Buyers saw opportunity in the natural beauty. The swamp had become a point of pride. There was talk of installing a boardwalk, maybe even a bird sanctuary. I still live here. Same back porch, same view. Only now, instead of a lake, I look out over a stretch of wild marshland teeming with life. Frogs, dragonflies, herons. It's not what I bought into, but it's better. The old board members avoided me, but I didn't care. I made my point. What began as an act of arrogance from the HOA ended up uniting the community, just not in the way they expected. In the end, they drained the lake to stop a theoretical flood, and I turned their hilltop mansions into real ones. This whole thing taught me more than I ever expected. About bureaucracy, about resilience, and especially about how to fight back the smart way. HOAs aren't evil by default. They're meant to protect communities. But when power goes unchecked, it can destroy what it was meant to preserve. And if you've ever felt powerless against one, know this: there's always a way to push back. You don't need to break the rules. You just need to know them better than the people in charge. Sometimes, doing the right thing takes patience, research, and the willingness to act when everyone else is too scared to. And if you're lucky, karma has a swampy sense of humor. So yeah, the HOA drained my lake, and I turned their empire into a marshland monument to their own arrogance. If you enjoyed this story, hit that like button. It helps way more than you think. And if you've ever had your own run-in with an overzealous HOA, drop your story in the comments. I read every single one. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories where justice, and sometimes mud, makes a surprise comeback. Until next time, remember, never underestimate a quiet neighbor with a drone, a camera, and a copy of the bylaws. Stay smart, stay bold, and don't let anyone drain your peace.